Have you ever noticed that depression rarely arrives loudly? Most of the time, it enters quietly. At first, it looks like simple exhaustion, a bad mood, lack of energy, emotional heaviness. And then one day, a person suddenly realizes they no longer feel like themselves anymore. Hi, I'm Monica, and today I want to talk about something millions of people silently struggle with every single day: depression. Not only as a diagnosis or mental state, but as an inner space where a person slowly begins losing themselves. Because depression feels a lot like a swamp. And the terrifying thing about swamps is that the more panic and obsession take over, the deeper they pull you in. The more a person repeats, "My life is ruined. I'll never feel normal again. Nothing will ever change. There's no point anymore." The heavier their inner world becomes. And eventually, depression stops feeling temporary. It starts feeling like identity. Like this is simply who you are now. But maybe one of the most important things to understand is that depression is not always you. Sometimes it's the environment a person stayed in for too long, the thoughts repeated too many times, the emotions never processed, the exhaustion ignored for years, the life that slowly disconnected someone from themselves. And no, healing does not happen overnight. But falling apart doesn't happen overnight either. Most people do not wake up depressed in a single day. It happens gradually. And that's exactly why people often fail to notice the moment their inner state first started collapsing, which is why one of the most important skills a person can develop is observation, not judgment. Observation. Because most people live almost entirely on autopilot. They wake up, reach for their phone, consume endless information, ignore their emotions, suppress stress, repeat destructive thoughts, stay around people who emotionally drain them, and then wonder why they constantly feel heavy inside. But imagine instead of drowning inside the emotion, you started observing it, quietly asking yourself, when exactly did my mood shift today? What triggered this feeling? What thought appeared before this emotion? What people drain my energy? What situations emotionally exhaust me? What habits pull me downward? At first, this can feel incredibly difficult, especially for people who have been disconnected from themselves for years. But slowly, you begin noticing patterns, and awareness changes everything because you cannot heal what you refuse to notice. The moment you begin identifying the source of your emotional decline, you slowly stop being completely controlled by it. And this is where something very important begins to shift. A person stops being only the victim of their emotions and slowly becomes the observer, not the depression itself, but the awareness observing it. And maybe that's the first real step out of darkness. Because when a person becomes the observer, space finally appears between them and their emotional state. Instead of, "I am depression," it becomes, "I'm going through a difficult period right now." And those are two completely different things. One creates identity, the other creates awareness. And awareness creates choice. Now, this next part is important. A person's energy flows where their focus goes. If someone constantly feeds hopelessness, feeds self pity, feeds the belief that nothing will ever change, their inner world becomes heavier and heavier, like a swamp slowly pulling them deeper. But the opposite is also true. People underestimate the power of small moments of light: a walk outside, sunlight, music, movement, deep breathing, silence, nature, creativity, good sleep, a peaceful conversation, even a small moment of gratitude. These things sound simple, but simple things repeated consistently can slowly bring a person back to life. And no, this does not mean pretending to be happy all the time. Toxic positivity helps nobody. There will still be difficult days, heavy mornings, moments when everything feels hard again. Healing is not linear, but maybe the goal is not to feel happy every second. Maybe the goal is learning how not to drown inside yourself, step by step, thought by thought, choice by choice. And honestly, I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is waiting for motivation before changing their life. But sometimes action must come before motivation. Sometimes the mind says, stay in bed, and healing responds, get up anyway. Sometimes depression says, nothing matters, and healing responds, take one small step anyway. Because every small action sends a signal to the brain, I'm still here. I haven't abandoned myself. I'm still fighting for my life. And over time, those small actions slowly begin rebuilding a person from within. But there's another thing almost nobody talks about. At some point, every person faces a choice to remain completely trapped in the identity of suffering or slowly become the creator of their life again. Not immediately, not perfectly, but gradually. And before a person becomes the creator, they first learn to become the observer, to notice, to observe their reactions, their triggers, their thoughts, their habits, their environment. Because awareness is the beginning of transformation. And maybe depression is not always a life sentence. Sometimes it's a painful chapter of life that forces a person to reconnect with themselves, to slow down, to reflect, to change direction, and finally ask themselves, what kind of life brought me to this state? Because sometimes depression is not the soul trying to destroy someone. Sometimes it's the soul refusing to continue living in a way that no longer feels alive. And maybe the most important thing to remember is this: depression is not proof that you are permanently broken. It's a state, a season, a chapter of life. And your future is not determined by how dark things feel right now. It's determined by whether you continue slowly moving forward, even while healing, one step at a time, one thought at a time, one decision at a time. And if nobody has told you this recently, hear this now. Your current state is not your final version. And maybe one of the strongest things a person can do is refuse to let darkness convince them that darkness is all that exists. And if videos like this help you feel even a little calmer, a little less anxious, or a little more connected to yourself, subscribe to the channel. We're going to talk about many more deep and meaningful topics together. My goal is simple: to help people understand themselves better, to reduce anxiety instead of feeding it, and to bring a little more peace into a world that already feels heavy enough.